Howdy! Welcome back to the Big Blue Workshop. Today I'm going to show you some stuff we made for the Pathfinder District Camporee. Each year they have a theme for the Camporee, and Troop 7 was going to make some stuff for the Western themed Camporee. Each troop got a state, and we were assigned Arizona. We had to make a wagon that we could pull in a parade and race. And then we also had to make a game. Our game was a calf roping game where we took some horses that we made out of barrels and we roped some little bulls or steers that we made out of some propane tanks. Last year the Camporee theme was the Olympics and we had to make chariots. So I already had two wheels that looked like wagon wheels. I decided to just use the old parts from the chariot to help make this wagon. The best way I've found to make wagon wheels is to sandwich two sheets of 3/4 inch plywood together, glue them together, screw them together, and make cuts in it to make it look like a wagon wheel. These are durable enough for the limited amount of running they have to do at a Camporee. We're not going to put a person in this thing, so it doesn't have to hold a lot of weight. I wanted to make it steer, so I built a mechanism that involved a little round washer that I just made out of plywood again. Took two 2x4s and ran a channel down the middle of them so that I could put the steering mechanism in it and then sandwich a piece of pipe in between the two 2x4s and then run a piece of all thread through that as an axle. That gave me enough stability where it would hold up and not bend as the wagon was moving. One of the challenges with making it steer was the wheels are huge and you couldn't let it steer far enough to actually let the wheels rub against the side of the wagon. So I had to put stops in it and different things like that. Eventually I ran into an additional challenge where I couldn't let it steer, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. The body was simply a piece of plywood with some 2x4s that made a square body, and then I built a small chair in the hopes that we were going to put like a stuffed animal in it. But here's a picture of it once I got the wheels on it just for size. Then I made a bunch of these little round washers that functioned as kind of a friction reducing part for the wagon. I got the whole thing assembled and then realized that it sat really low to the ground, and some of my scouts are 6 feet tall. They wouldn't be able to bend over and steer this wagon very easily. So once I got the whole thing built, I even got it painted, and I realized that this steering mechanism I had built for one rod that was going to steer the wagon was just not going to function correctly. So all that work I put into making it steer really went out the window, and I ended up screwing the front axle straight to the body of the wagon and putting two poles on it. Again, these were poles that we had used on the chariot, so it wasn't that big a deal, but they were just big long fence poles that you'd use for chain link fencing. I screwed those to the bottom of the wagon using these U-bolts, and the boys basically just had to lift up the front of the wagon and kind of make it pop a wheelie, but it would steer on the back wheels almost the same way they would make the chariot steer. I wanted to put a little color in it, so I painted the spokes of the wheels red and then painted the wheels brown. Again, I had to be careful how I painted it because I put graphite on those little axles that I used in the washers I used to make it roll cleaner. To make the canopy on top, one of the dads had some old bicycle flags that I was able to just bend over just enough to make 3 or 4 runs down the middle of the wagon. And then I just went to the fabric store and bought some yellow fabric and some red fabric, cut out what looked like an Arizona flag and glued it on. I stitched a channel down the front and the back of the canopy so that I could run some shock cord. I had some old shock cord left over from a tent repair kit and ran that through the front and the back of it, and that really gave it a genuine look. I guess the word would be more authentic than anything, but it ended up looking like a wagon when all was said and done, and that's all we really needed it to do. Once I got the whole thing assembled, the biggest part was to be able to transport it. So I removed the top from it, removed the wheels from it so we could load it in a trailer. Once we got to the campsite, one of the other dads and I assembled it. You can see the boys here. There's 4 boys in cowboy hats pulling the wagon, and you can see they just kind of popped a wheelie and ran with it. It ended up being one of the more authentic looking wagons. It was small, but it looked like a wagon. This one sitting behind it actually was just made out of styrofoam, and the boys just picked the whole thing up and ran with it. We didn't end up winning the race, but we did get an award for our design, so we were one of the best looking out there. The boys were proud of it, I was proud of it. We really enjoyed doing it. Making the horses for the roping game was a whole nother animal, literally. I actually found a picture of a cartoon horse and used that as my design inspiration. I cut a ton of plywood to make this thing work, but I started by making a base for these barrels. I knew it was going to have to be stable enough to hold some of the larger scouts along with the smaller ones. I ended up putting the cutouts from the wheels to good use and using them as support brackets that would hold these barrels up. I also had to figure out how to keep the barrel from spinning around, so I put screws through the bottom of these supports into the barrel itself to keep the boys from slipping off. I really struggled making anything anatomically correct, so trying to make legs for a horse was an extreme challenge for me. Again, I looked at my picture of my cartoon horse and tried to make some legs the best I could out of plywood. Cutting out the head of a horse with a jigsaw was even more challenging. I wanted it to be somewhat three-dimensional, but knew I wasn't going to achieve that with just a flat sheet of plywood. So I figured I was going to have to rely on my drawing skills to make it work. I once again relied on my clip art and drew a face on the plywood to get started, and then used some good old-fashioned poster paint to paint in the eyes and the mouth. Of course, before I could do any of that, I had to give it a base coat. I went to Home Depot and got some Oops paint and sprayed the barrels and the bodies and the heads and everything with brown. They ended up looking pretty good as long as the paint didn't scratch off the barrels, which it did in the trailer. Another tedious part of this was the yarn that I used to make the mane. That was an exercise in me cutting everything into little bitty strips and then gluing it and stapling it to the top of the horse's head. You can see here the basic finished product with the eyes painted on it and the mane stapled to the top. A couple of families loaned me some saddles to put on the horses. We actually wrapped them around the wood base and they held on pretty tight so the boys didn't slip off. The concept of the game was steer roping, so the horses were static, but then we made these steers so that one of the dads would pull a steer on wheels and the boys had to try to lasso the steer before it actually got away. One of the other dads actually made the steers. He used these small propane bottles and some sawhorses with wheels on them. Yes, those are bicycle handlebars up there for horns. Those of you familiar with scouting are familiar with Philmont, and yes, we named one of the steers Phil, and the other one was named Monty. The boys had a great time, the dads had a great time, and everything was a success. Sorry I didn't have more video clips in here, but I simply just kind of documented this with photos, so come on back, watch more videos here on the channel. I should have more posted coming up soon. Have a great day.